This is Unsupervised Learning, Replit AI podcast. I'm Jacob Efron, and I'm joined by my co-host Pat Chase. And today we had an awesome episode with Amjad Masad. Amjad started his career as one of the early hires at Code Academy, and then founded Replit, a really interesting company focused on getting the next billion developers into this space. Replit is at the forefront of using AI in a ton of interesting ways. They've raised over $100 million at an over $1 billion valuation, and Amjad hit on a bunch of things, including the future of agents. He's actually quite bullish. What it will mean to be a software engineer, given all the progress in AI coding models. We hit on why Replit actually built their own model, spent $100,000 to build a really massive model. And we also hit on why open source models aren't actually that open today. I think folks are really going to enjoy this. Definitely stay tuned for Pat and my debrief. And without further ado, here's Amjad. So to start, I mean, you're obviously at the forefront of a lot of these AI coding solutions and where the space is headed. I'm curious, what advice you'd have for someone that's starting learning coding today. Is it something they should or shouldn't do? Yeah, how would you think about that?
My answer to that would be the similar pre-LM, would be similar to that. I always believed that, the way to learn coding is to make things, which is nothing groundbreaking as a conclusion, but, the sort of academic way of going to university and studying the basics, all of that's like, there are a certain type of person that learns that way. But actually, I don't think most people learn that way. Most people will have some kind of goal, and in the way towards achieving that goal, they happen to learn things along the way in order to achieve that goal. Which, by the way, is is almost the definition of intelligence, right? You have a goal, and you kind of learn to get to that goal. Obviously, our education system inverts that, where you go in this very undirected way of learning random facts that maybe someday would apply. What actually turns out 90% of the things you learn, you never apply. So my view has always been the reason coding has been more niche than it should be. What is it, like less than 0.5% of the global population, has any exposure to any kind of coding. You would expect it to be a lot more given how prevalent computers are and how powerful coding is, and the ROI you get from coding, whether pursuing as a career, but also as a tool. It's incredibly enriching to your life. And so there's this paradox: why isn't more popular? And I worked at actually my first job out of college. I was founding engineer at Code Academy. Yeah. And Code Academy's whole thing was actually the best way to learn how to code is to actually make things and do it by learn by doing. LLMs just takes that to this extreme conclusion, because actually you can get something running in 5 minutes contact with an editor that is LLM powered, right? And that that makes it so that you're not immediately faced with all sorts of IT drudgery and tasks of installing things and figuring things out and trying to get something running. If you go to Replit, you could start by prompting, or you could start by forking an existing template, a website, personal website, and then prompting the AI to do a basic edit. And then you get that dopamine hit of running it for the first time and seeing your results. And then you want to do another thing, and then you have an idea for a bigger project, and it's all messy, right? It's like you start a template, you fork a template, you try something, you hit an error, you hit something, you throw that out, you go to GitHub, you grab some code, you go to Stack Overflow, you talk to an LLM, you talk to multiple LLMs, and I think that's how it should be. And so I think really LLM takes this idea of learning by doing to its conclusion.
Do you think that the skill set of a software engineer then needs to look different? Like if you were, advising someone who's in middle school right now and thinking about a long-term career in software, is there, maybe relative to prior generations, something they should prioritize more in the way they're learning?
So, my prediction that I made, a few years ago now, a couple of years ago, when it became obvious that AI is going to change programming, was that sort of software is going to bifurcate. And it was already on that trend where you had the front-end engineer and the back-end engineer. But I think that gap will widen even more, and you'll have sort of the product engineer, the product creator. You can be an entrepreneur. You can give a crap about coding. You just want to make something. You want to get customers. You want to get users. And that will look very different than how we thought about software engineering. I think majority of the time you're prompting. You're iterating on your prompts. You're obviously still debugging code for a period of time. At some point, maybe that also would get automated away. But I think the traditional way of thinking about software engineering, and the analogy of engineering is that you're thinking about components, you're thinking about systems, you're thinking about, and that sort of bifurcates. So I think it depends on what you want to do. Do you want to be a product creator, or do you want to go the traditional path, software engineering, which I don't think it's going to change all that much. It will obviously still change with AI, but if you want to build cloud infrastructure or data pipelines or backend systems, I don't think that's going to change all that much. But the act of creating software for a customer, for end user consumption, I think that's the thing that's going to change rapidly. So I think the root question here is like, which one do you want to go? So I would say if you want to go the traditional software engineering path, probably getting a computer science degree and doing all of that is still relevant. But if you just want to be a builder, you can just start with that.
You touched a little bit upon the Replit's AI products, and there's a bunch and tons of ways that you're using Replit, and a bunch of our listeners are super familiar with the product as well. But maybe just could you give a quick overview of some of the ways that Replit is using AI with things like Ghostwriter and what those are?
Yeah, so Ghostwriter, we actually renamed it. So Ghostwriter was our AI product. And actually, it's kind of interesting to kind of talk about the reasoning of why we renamed it. It's just Replit AI now, or just think about it as Replit. The analogy I give is, when GUIs first came on the scene, they were actually an add-on. So you bought DOS, and then you paid another $100 to Microsoft to get the Windows add-on. And you guys are probably younger than me, but then you would launch Windows from DOS, right? And your main entry point to the OS is still DOS. But then if you want GUI every now and then, you get that. So right now we're in this era of the copilots, right? Mm-hmm. You buy a piece of software, and then Notion or Excel, whatever, and then you pay an additional fee, and then you get an AI powered software. My view is that that's a transitionary period. Mm-hmm. And companies counting on that add-on revenue should really be worried. Because I think that we're going to start to rethink software from the perspective of LLMs and what we can do with LLMs. So Replit has always been about long-term thinking, and so we went through this period where it's an add-on. We call it a Ghostwriter, but then it was like, okay, yeah, I know this is where the future is headed. So we actually embedded it in the product, and we tried to make it so that every interaction you have with the product is AI powered. And we made it a part of the free plan as well. So literally the first line of code you type at Replit, you get an AI suggestion. And then, our pro plan comes with bigger models and better services and things like that. But still, one of the reasons is structural. Inside the company, I want the designers not to think about every workflow is this is the workflow without AI, this is the workflow with AI. No, think about it, start from AI. Mm-hmm. And so the way the product works today is that when you're typing code, we'll give you code suggestions. So this is like Copilot. Actually, Gmail started with that. You had the Ghost text, if you remember that. I don't think they even used LLMs at that time, but it was quite powerful. And Copilot kind of copied that UX pattern, and now it's become very popular. So we do that. We trained our own model to do that. It's really fast and really powerful. And then now there are all these other. So this is I like to call it the push model, where the user is passively getting AI suggestions. Now the sort of pull model, when the user wants to do a bigger task, wants to generate an entire file, it can do right-click and generate. And you can type up a prompt, you can spend your time kind of crafting that prompt, and you can get an entire file generated based on the context and everything. That's another one. And then there's sort of sprinkles of AI workflows in every aspect of the product. So for example, you get an error. If you get an error in the console, we show you an AI debug button. You can click that. It opens the console. It opens the AI chat pre-prompted with the error and whatever relevant context, and kind of tells you about that. There's probably another 5 to 10 features kind of like that, but this is the general landscape of how the product works, right?
It's a really interesting point that it sounds like basically, in thinking about doing a Copilot, add-on set of features versus just embedding it in the product, it's almost like you didn't want to continue supporting a product that didn't have AI in it. It's like, for all your users, you want your entire team just focused on that AI embedded experience.
Yes.
I'd be curious, I feel like you have a great vantage point into this. Where are we today in what, these AI models can and can't do in the coding world? I'm sure you guys are always pushing the limits. So how would you characterize kind of what's possible, what's not? And how much does that change with when we move to GPT-4 or something? With each model release, does it feel like that dramatically changes a bit? Would love your thoughts on that.
So in the GPT-2, starting with the GPT-2 era and GPT-3, there was a mystical component of LLM almost. Nobody knew how really they work. There was this sense of, it generalizes after distribution. Maybe it's AGI. Maybe we achieve AGI. And it was actually a very interesting, fun period because you had people approaching GPT-3 like anthropologists, trying to study it. You had these blog posts kind of trying
what's going on inside the box.
Yeah. And it's super interesting, right? And I think, my view has sort of evolved as I understood LLMs better. In my view on LLMs now, is sort of in a very reductive way, it's a function of data. The most reductive way you can think about it, and others have made that point, it's a compression of the data. That doesn't mean it's not powerful, but the real power of LLMs is the interpolation of different distributions of data. So, writing a rap song in the style of Shakespeare, right? That's a sort of a fun example of interpolating different
Pat and I love doing that.
Yeah. It's super funny. That's what everyone spent last year doing in ChatGPT.
Jacob still listens to these in his free time.
Yeah, you know what you should do?
Pretty good.
You should do that and then now plug it into Suno. Did you know that
we plug Suno on this podcast.
Suno is very cool. Yeah.
Yes. And so you start chaining these things, and now you have a complete sort of AI generated piece of art, which is amazing, and piss off the humanities people a lot. It's like, you nerds, you think you're doing art? It's not art. Yeah. So it's a new programming paradigm, and I think Karpathy called it software 2.0 at some point, which is you're programming with data, and so to understand the capabilities of these models, you have to understand what kind of data you're feeding them, and then what kind of fine-tuning or post-training mechanisms you're using, whether it's sort of instruction fine-tuning, it's RLHF. Now there's direct, what's it called, DPO, direct optimization, I think. There's so many new of these post-training. And one way to think of the post-training is you have what we're calling foundation model, which is like a vast collection of different capabilities and personalities and all sorts of weird things. In post-training, fine-tuning, you're sort of, you're trying to make it better at some downstream tasks. That's very specific. And so the question is where is it headed? It's a question of where the data sources are coming from, and how much scaling and how much compute can we put onto it. There's a bit of a bearish answer on programming, because I would argue we've sort of run out of open source tokens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think if even our small 3B model, we trained on permissive data, but we trained them all GitHub repositories, permissive data, and our own Replit user code. And if you think about something like GPT-4, it's actually trained on all code data on the internet, plus paying hundreds of millions of dollars to companies like Scale and contractors to annotate coding data. So now we're in this paradigm of paying people to generate data.
Yeah.
Now Replit has the advantage of actually having a large user base of people actually generate unique tokens. So but that doesn't mean the capabilities will stop here. I think we'll figure things out, and maybe it's just a question of paying a lot of money. But also, there's a way in which just the coding ability could improve by function of scale, by function of even getting as much data as possible, even if it's not coding. For example, scientific data has been shown to improve code, even legal text. So we can find these coding adjacent reasoning things that will actually go back and improve coding. So I would assume we have another 2 to 3 years of increased capabilities of coding. I don't know what kind of products they will unlock. That's the hard thing about working in the space. I could sort of start to imagine what it could look like. I actually gave a TED talk about where I think this space headed in 3 to 5 years.
On the data front, if LLMs and these generative models that are coding, if they're as good as the data that you feed them, I guess what makes the best data? Is it size? Is it, curating it? Or you guys obviously have a bunch of proprietary data, but how do you think about what the ideal data set would be for a code generation model?
So size matters a lot. You want to be able to, size and compute are very related, right? Because the more tokens you have, the more compute you can spend training this token. The more diversity of tokens, the more fresh the tokens are, the better. We've also shown with our 3B model that you can do multiple epochs on the same data. If it's high quality, you can continue to get lower loss and better improvement in performance and accuracy over that. Now, on the quality of data, there are some basic things. For example, if you train on minified JavaScript, you're really messing up your model. Yeah. It's learning all sorts of wrong things. Nobody codes like that. You want to train on data generated by the best programmers, because one way to think about GPT is they are emulation machines. Mm-hmm. They emulate the process that humans have of, because they're trying to guess the next token. They are, behavior cloning almost of humans. So the higher quality the human thinking is, the higher quality the model is. So there's all sorts of heuristics you could use. If you take, public repositories like on GitHub, you can even do some kind of mapping of users and figure out who are the best programmers. One thing we found is actually a lot of people when they're training code models, they think, okay, we want to get the highest code with the high stars, and mm-hmm. Those tend to be the libraries, which they're good, they're high quality tokens, but actually the thing that there's more poverty of is the usage of the libraries. It's the downstream applications. GitHub is full of high quality infrastructure code, but it's not full of high quality application code. And this is where we think Replit sort of shines, because a lot of people are writing applications on Replit. On
the application side, at the beginning you were talking about, there would be this bifurcation of engineers into people building apps and then maybe more of the infrastructure folks. How do you think AI will benefit the different groups, of whether that's, an engineer who's just starting versus intermediate versus advanced? Are they all going to use AI in the same way, or do you think that it will disproportionately benefit, certain types of groups? Maybe it's the product engineers or someone else.
My hunch initially was the return on investment for a beginner now went way up, right? Like I said, you can, with minimal amount of code understanding, we have people on Replit. We have this 100 days of code course that we provide for free. We have people go from that to starting a company to making hundreds and thousands of ARR, doing micro SaaS applications in a matter of months, which is
that's incredible.
So there has never been a kind of ROI on learning how to code like the period we are in right now. So I think this one group is obviously benefited a lot. I think that I think that there's been a study. I think it wasn't coding. It was some consulting group.
BCG Consultants. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, so it showed that it benefited beginners more than advanced people.
Yeah, I think it was like the worst consultants, right, or like the lower rated ones or whatnot.
Those are the ones that got the most boost.
Yeah, they got the most boost from it.
I mean, that sort of intuitively makes sense. I do wonder, there's not a study been made where you condition on training people to use AI as best you can, right? Because we all know there's a way to leverage ChatGPT. There's prompting techniques. There's chain of thought. There's all these ways in which you can get better at prompting LLMs. And so I think if you start to condition on that, then I think it will tilt over to the more advanced people. Because not only you have the skills to debug and write the software, but you also have the skills to use LLMs better and seek different LLMs and different diversity of LLMs. I often will and this is for my personal use outside of coding, I'll go to ChatGPT. I wouldn't get an answer. I would open the Perplexity Playground and go to Mixtral and might get an answer from that. And so that being good at that sort of seeking the answer for an LLM, I think will start to make a difference.
I think your point's a really interesting one because it seems like there's a set of people that know how to use these applications in super sophisticated ways. And maybe if you haven't had exposure to that yet, you have some not great experience and give up. I imagine that manifests itself a lot in your own product experience, right? And I'm sure you guys have thought a lot about how do you there's probably some set of people that use Replit AI in a way that you're like, oh, I just wish everyone had exposure to that. How have you thought about the user education side and getting the 95% of people up to what the top 5% are using it?
Rashad here. I'm the producer of Unsupervised Learning, and I want to take a quick break to, one, say thank you for tuning in, and two, give you a little insight in what we have planned for 2024. So the team has been working really hard at figuring out who the best, smartest, top guests would be to have on this show, reaching out to those guests, working around their schedules to bring them on and tell their story of how they're navigating the very rapidly developing landscape of AI. So please consider subscribing to this channel so you don't miss out on those awesome episodes to come for this year. And thanks again for listening. Now back to the show.
How have you thought about the user education side and getting the 95% of people up to what the top 5% are using it?
In retrospect, what I'm going to say is not so surprising, but it was surprising for us. I think, younger people, kids are, they are much better at adapting and starting to build a mental model for what the LLM is able to do and be able to naturally start to prompt it. And naturally, Replit has, a large base of young people. And so we found that when we started rolling it out for free and it's just suggestions started to appear, a lot of people just rolled with it. They didn't even blink. A lot of younger people, a lot of more established people kind of were a little jarred by it. We had some teachers that rely on Replit to teach programming reach out to us and say, you have destroyed my classroom. So our response to them is look, you can turn it off. You can tell your students to turn it off. But we think, this moment is sort of like the calculator. There's a lot of teachers, if you go look back at history, that were really banned the calculator in class and all of that. But it's a tool. It's going to get widespread usage. So might as well try to learn and be ahead of the curve. And we started seeing some teachers that within 2 or 3 days actually find that their students are learning better and their students are better than them at figuring out what these models are capable of. And the reason it's not so surprising in retrospect, because you see it in a lot of places where younger generations are able to adapt to new innovation. This is a biological fact of the plasticity of the brain, right? And so it's true in this case as well.
How have you guys thought about structuring your teams around AI? We had Linus on the podcast, and he talked about how they were doing it at Notion, which it seemed like over time was moving more towards horizontal. We have kind of AI in all of our products, and so they structured their team that way. We've also had a bunch of other folks that say, hey, we want to embed them within the product because it's so core to this vertical or this specific product. How have you guys thought about structuring the AI team?
I've always been about horizontal, and I think it's just the infrastructure engineering me. I'm just generally an infrastructure guy, so it's you always want to build platforms. I want to build, and I think it just makes business sense because again, if you absolutely convince yourself that it's going to touch every aspect of software, which I think it is. And by the way, and this separate discussion, I think actually will I'm surprised how slow it is to people saying, oh, it's moving really fast. I was I actually would have guessed that would be further ahead instead of
what did you think would have happened by now?
I would have think every piece of technology that I have would, be proficient in natural language. Like, why can't I talk to Siri yet and like give it complex instructions? I don't know. And but it's just the nature of corporates being slow.
What do you think about the speed with which it's affected coding? I feel like that's been really rapid in some respects, but then also maybe even slower than now that machines can write code. Like, why isn't everyone using them? Or I guess to some extent they are.
Yeah, the way Copilot spread is definitely like surprising. Especially how fast corporates were open to the idea, especially given the legal risk and things like that. So I think that's one area. But it's sort of lame in a way, because of course we're gonna adopt it. Like, we built this shit. Like, but what we want to do is like have the like everyday person improve lives and improve economic conditions, and we're in this world of slow growth, and it's causing all sorts of problems in the world. And I think AI will help us kind of kickstart another sort of S curve of growth. And I think it's imperative that it moves faster, in my opinion. And that there are forces that are working against that culturally and legally and in all sorts of ways that are even within these companies. I mean, we saw the OpenAI drama, right? There are elements within the big AI labs that are trying to slow things down, which I think is ill-advised. So, I would have expected the everyday consumer life to have changed meaningfully. I would have expected the everyday professional life, the prosumer life, to have changed meaningfully. I mean, I still, Gmail should be able to create calendar invites based on my emails. And it doesn't. Why not? Right? I mean, it's just basic things. I feel like it should have rolled out faster.
Totally. I mean, one thing I definitely want to make sure we hit on is I feel like early on you were, I think one of the first ones we publicly heard about that was, you're like, we're going to build our own model. And I think you were like the poster child for Mosaic as one of their case studies. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that decision, because I think, a lot of folks we talk to say, well, first we like to experiment with like the latest OpenAI models, figure out what's possible, make sure we build something our users want. And then maybe, I feel like a lot of people are in the wait and see mode of, yeah, maybe we'll build our own model or maybe we'll use open source long term. But for now, we're not there. And it feels like very quickly you guys moved to, no, this is something we really want to have in-house.
So I think it's totally rational, what people are saying, especially the speed at which the models are getting more affordable. I mean, GPT 3.5 just got halved in price, I think, recently, right? It was 10x, just 6 months ago, and it'll continue. So I think it's totally rational for a lot of these companies to not want to train these models. The reason it was crucial for Replit to do that is because actually none of the commercial models have the characteristics that we want, which is low latency. The way Copilot was able to get to market is because of their deep partnership with OpenAI, in which they were able to take, have custom models and have a custom partnership where they can hit these latency constraints. And by the way, Copilot's gotten way slower recently. I think they're just using now stock GPT 3.5 or something. But for us, latency was very important. Cost was very important. I always had this vision that it needs to be part of the free experience.
Yeah.
Because again, I wanted to structure the company in a way that we're just AI native. And when we ran the numbers, it just never made sense to be a customer of these commercial models. And then when we used open source to prototype our first Ghostwriter release, we used a Salesforce 3 billion parameter model. And I think one of the things we were early on is that actually small models are capable. And we did a lot of work to productionize it. And then I was like, okay, small models are capable. Small models are affordable to train and deploy. Therefore, it made sense for us to spend $100K. I mean, really, we spent $100K, training our 3B models. Like, it's not a huge capital expenditure. And I think we're early to start developing that talent internally. And we have the AI team at Replit is still small. It's like 7, 8 people.
Wow.
But Replit is all about being lean and mean. We're 100 plus people total. So for all these reasons, it made sense for us to do that. But by the way, we are now customers of commercial models for a lot of these other use cases that I talked about. It doesn't make sense for us to go create a general purpose chat model for some of the chat features that we have. So I would say always start from the problem, from the customer pain point, explore potential solutions, run the numbers, and if it makes sense to make the investment internally. I mean, there's some strategic considerations. Like if you consider yourself to be an AI company, I mean, Arvind is a great example of that at Perplexity. Perplexity is by and large a user of commercial models, the reductive way of thinking about GPT wrapper or whatever, which I disagree with these characterizations. I think they're dumb. Arvind
has some hot takes on
yeah,
GPT
sure.
wrapper, so yeah.
Sure. But they're building a very competent AI team. They're using Perplexity Playground as a way to build and battle test that team because they know they're going to be able to deploy different AI technologies in the future. So there's a strategic angle that you need to look at as well.
Totally. So I guess like gazing forward, 3-5 years, do you think there's going to be a lot of companies like Replit that decide to build their own model, or will most people be using commercial APIs or maybe doing light fine tunes of open source models? Like how many companies are going to spend the $100K to kind of train something large?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard because, I recently made this tweet that went viral and generated a lot of discussion, which I said, we don't really have true open source models. And the analogy I made is that you can't reproduce the open source models, and therefore it's not really open source, right? So imagine if you can only use the Linux binary. Would you consider that open source? No. Imagine if you get the Linux source code, but the compiler for it is not available. Would you consider that open source? No. This is where we are right now. I have nothing but respect for Meta and Mistral, all these companies. I'm friends with all of them. But if you're using open source models, you're dependent on the goodwill of Zuck to continue to push out, Llama 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So in the absence of that, I think a lot of companies are gonna be saying, do we really want to, bet our business on the fact that, Zuck will always be in a good mood, right?
Or that his shareholders will always let him spend $10 billion on compute.
Although, Zuck is in like the dual class.
Yes, exactly.
It's a different
That's
thing.
fair.
So I think the reason I'm having trouble answering this is because I would have said like maybe a year ago, of course, open source. Of course, a lot of companies will just do the fine tuning of open source and there's an ecosystem. But the more I thought about it, I think strategically you don't want to depend on the current version of open source long term. I think you want to treat them sort of like commercial models. You want to experiment with them. You want to prototype with them. Maybe you want to deploy them in production, but you want to have a path towards some sustainable way of using them and depending on them without having this external dependency that you don't have any control over. So I would say TBD. I think the way things look right now, I think the commercial side is actually ahead. And I think most people will depend on the commercial side. If the OpenAI fine-tuning business goes well as well, and they have this custom model business,
I think it's a few $1 million now,
just
right?
a few million bucks. I think Anthropic's doing a lot of that. They have solutions engineering and things like the AI companies are looking more like traditional enterprise companies. They have ways of implementing these solutions for customers, and there's a services aspect of it. And so I guess I don't think I have a great answer for you, but the landscape is not set yet. But so far, I would love to see an open source project that is actually truly open source, that improves over time, that allows contributions back, and that has that open source flywheel.
It's a really interesting point to your earlier, statement that like these models are basically just reflections of the data that is put into them. If you don't know the underlying data that trains these models, how does your own AI team iterate and kind of improve them? And so it seems that, obviously a really powerful part about having your own model now is exactly the levers you can pull on the data side and how that ends up impacting the underlying model.
Yeah, you're programming with data, and therefore the data is the source code in that analogy. And so if you don't know what's the source code, I think Karpathy was sort of early to that, but he talked about this idea of building essentially backdoors into these models, and backdoors that are not activated. Actually, going back to the 70s, there's this paper by, I think, Ken Thompson, one of the inventors of the C programming language. It was called Trusting Trust. And he comes up with this very clever system where, how the C compiler is written in C. And, in sort of software engineering terms, it's bootstrapped. You kind of write the first compiler in assembly or assembler, and then you get the C language into a place where you can write the compiler in it, and then you use the previous compiler to compile the new compiler in C, and then the result is a new compiler that's fully bootstrapped, right? Which is kind of an insane concept. But he shows that you can put in a backdoor on a compiler, and after it's bootstrapped, there's no way to recover the source code, and therefore there's a backdoor built into it that can evade inspection. And so the LLM training can suffer a similar thing,
right?
And you can hide this thing that's only activated after a certain thing is uttered, after some certain command is given to it. And so, if you don't have clarity on the training process and the data that went into that, there's a huge security risk.
Kind of sounds analogous to the sci-fi stuff we were talking about before we started recording.
Yeah. I mean, I think the world's going to get, way weirder. It's already getting pretty strange. I mean, I now have a background thread whenever I see any type of media, as I'm sure you two as well, but any media I see is like, there's something that's check. Is this AI? Check the hands, check the, So I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder. Actually, there's a I think a sort of a French intellectual tradition, most famously I don't know how to pronounce it, Baudrillard, I think his name is, and he coined this term hyperreality. And they were talking about sort of the end state of this, postmodern world that we live in, is that it would be incredibly hard to know what's fiction and what's reality. And in a lot of ways, we would be living in a sort of virtual reality. And so I feel like we're running towards that world as fast as we can.
I was tricked by a video very recently of, I think it was Kim Kardashian and Taylor Swift teaching calculus. And for the first...
That sounds amazing, by the way.
It is incredible. I forget exactly which account this was, but for the first 3 seconds of this, I was like, wait, how did they get Kim Kardashian? I thought it was something where they had done this partnership and she was teaching them about derivatives.
That would be great, actually.
I thought it was like a really like a educational thing, which, maybe judge me for that. But then over time I was like, oh, this is actually fake. But to your point, it's that period where is getting pushed out farther and farther, and you now have this question of, wait, is this actually real or did they generate this? And I think there's going to be a lot more of that. So
yeah, and I the pessimistic thing is that no one is really building the technology to counteract that. And maybe there's no money in it. That's why the market is not really. But like, why don't I have a Chrome extension now that I can like tell me which media is fake and which media is real?
Yeah. They target everyone with what they think is going to resonate with them most. So the fact that you were targeted with derivatives is, I think says, yeah.
Yeah. It's good content.
I don't think I'd be targeted with that. But that's probably says more about me.
You're targeted with the Shakespeare poems.
Yeah,
the
Shakespeare rap.
Yeah.
Exactly is what I would be targeted with. You kind of alluded to this earlier, but like I think one thing that's interesting, it sounds like, especially because you're offering these AI features in your free product, is just the pricing, like the cost of inference for these models and how that impacts your decisions.
Yeah.
Wondering, like, we were talking about earlier, the pricing of this stuff keeps coming down. Is there a set of, features that you're like, oh, we would love to do this, this often or something, but today it's kind of cost prohibitive. If our friends keep slashing prices every 3 months, maybe in a year it's something we'll do.
Yeah, I think the agent model is interesting. The way I think started with the AutoGPT wave, I think, where you recursively call the model, and LangChain sort of allows for that as well. And being able to run it in the background, being able to like give a prompt, and okay, there's a high likelihood of failure, but I don't care. It's going to run in the background. And a prompt of like refactor this and run the tests and make sure they're successful. I mean, these things, especially with GPT-4, get really expensive really quickly, and like most consumers, most developers even would not want to pay for that. So background agentic workflows, which by the way, I don't think they work all that well, but you can sort of throw compute at them and try to make them work. But again, it gets too expensive. So I think we haven't really spent a lot of time there. We have some research projects about how we can train more effective agentic models. The thing is, GPT-4 is agentic almost accidentally. And not entirely accidentally. I think OpenAI programmed them in some way to be, respond better to like chain of thoughts and things like that. But the fact that LLMs have any agentic capabilities is actually somewhat surprised me, because I thought that the way to get agents is to do what's called action transformers, which is a probability distribution not over utterances, it's over actions. And as far as I know, I think Tesla self-driving, the new thing is like a action transformer. But there hasn't been a lot of, a lot of progress there. Adept kind of released a demo like maybe 2 years ago now, Act 1, where like they trained, I think people are calling them LAMs, large action models. There was the recent Rabbit kind of presentation where they talked about LAMs. But again, this hasn't really affected people's everyday lives yet. But maybe that's the next ChatGPT moment when agents actually start to work.
On the pricing side for your users, you talked about wanting to have AI as part of the free tier, but then also maybe more advanced features. Like, how do you think about pricing over time as you continue to build more and more AI features and build that into the product?
You want to, again, if you're starting from the assumption that AI is going to be table stakes, then the way to think about pricing is from a value-based perspective, as opposed to like cost plus, and this is what AI is costing us. You want to try to project forward some amount of how much cheaper these models are getting to run, the inference stack getting more efficient. And companies, frankly, I mean, there was an information article about Anthropic's margins not being super great, which makes sense, right?
They were still pretty good though, right? It was like 55 to 60. I thought,
yeah.
when I clicked it, I thought it was going to be like 5 or something.
Okay, all right. But there's some amount of, in the like Uber 2013 period of VC subsidized rides, where like there's some amount of VC subsidized
models
tokens.
And training and tokens.
Yeah. So, but you want to project that forward a little bit, and then try to reason about what kind of value you're providing to your customers. Think about the competitive landscape as well. But I really wouldn't start from the perspective like this is what AI is costing me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think that's something that we're seeing more and more companies are saying, hey, the product's not going to make any sense without AI. So the price is the price for the product, and then we're going to build in AI.
By the way, one sort of bet I made, a couple of years ago was like usage-based pricing is going to get a lot more prevalent, because even if you have a tiered pricing, you can have users that are costing you a ton, like real power users that are spending a lot on these models, and it's true of the enterprise as well. Like you can have a distribution where it just would it make sense to have a SaaS, a pure subscription and SaaS sort of model, and we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of usage-based implementations of AI. Replit has a bundle that gives you a ton of compute, ton of AI, ton of storage, all of that. But then you can get overages on all these things as well. So I think there's some of that's happening. I actually invested in a company called Orb that does usage-based pricing as a service, and they're doing super well. So I think that's one area I think that's based on what I said before. Yes, you want to think about this value-based thing, but there's going to be a way. You need a way to scale with usage.
Yeah, I would imagine that's super important, especially for engineers that are going to use the models in a bunch of different ways, right? If you are working at an agency and maybe you're cranking out a web app every day, like you could be generating tons and tons of code, which could be quite expensive for whatever platform you're doing.
I think it's going to get really expensive when these models are in the CI/CD pipelines.
Yeah, exactly. They run every time you build something.
Yeah, GitHub Actions with LLMs. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Definitely gets more expensive when they run when you're sleeping or something like that. Yeah.
Which they will.
Yeah.
Again, this is one area I think that I would have expected now we would have some kind of LLMs doing things in the background.
I mean, you alluded to it earlier about the kind of future being this trend around like agentic work. One, I think it would be helpful to just contextualize kind of where we are with that today and the timeline in which you see that changing. And then another question I have just hearing you talk about it is like, how do you think about whether like you should be doing research around that at Replit versus like, let me, wait and just see what like the major labs are able to come up with or the adepts of the world?
Yeah. So I do think that agents is the next big. A lot of people thought multimodal is going to be the next big thing, which I think multimodal is great. It's important. Maybe there's another hype moment that we'll see this year when everything is truly multimodal, but I don't think it's as big of a step. I don't think it's another ChatGPT moment. It's just an incremental improvement that's pretty profound, but it's still incremental. And it depends on a lot of things getting better. It depends on pricing getting better, on latency getting better. That Google demo that turned out to be somewhat staged, which I honestly don't fault them for it. I think they had and we're also partners, so I'm not supposed to say bad things about Google. But
it was a cool demo.
Yeah. I love Google, but they had that demo, but it was obviously not feasible today. And so multimodal needs a lot of things to happen. So I think agentic workflows and background sort of agents doing things on your behalf, some version of it will start, I think, happening this year. In terms of, I really want to be part of this agent. I have use cases for agents. I want to start a startup around agents. What do I do? Do I just wait for the AI gods to kind of drop some agent APIs on us, or do I go and try to do something? I'm of the mind that entrepreneurs need to be able to kind of walk through walls, right? You need to be able to get a product to market with whatever you have to do within your means, right? So if you really want to make a big bet on agents, you could probably try to make something work with GPT-4. It could be very expensive. It could be more of a prototype demo, but you can start learning. And then if it just makes sense for you to go and try to fine tune and try to experiment and try to do more researchy things, that also I think is a relevant path. For more established companies, I think let's say more established companies with not a lot of money to spend or not a lot of technical talent or AI talent, probably wait and see.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the situation.
Is there like a particular milestone you're looking for, like in the agent space? Like, you're like, I want to see the day that like it can build this basic app, or, is there something you point to internally that you're gunning for?
Being able, and this is like more of a soft kind of milestone, but like being able to give a model just a bulleted list of actions without insane amount of chain of thought and recursive debugging and all of that, and for it to follow it and not go off the rails and not start talking to itself or all of that stuff that's happening today, I think that's the first sign that, okay, we're closer. The ability, especially for the commercial models, to have a sort of a non-hacky way to be able to call in a dependable way, sort of like function calls. Again, function calls is one of those things that it works in like 90% of the cases, but there are like 10% of the cases that are really catastrophic failures, and it does like really random things. And you can't depend on it in a context of doing financial workflows or legal workflows or things like that. So I would say it's a more reliability question. And, there's a way to look at these metrics. There are some of these, task to pull request startups like sweep.dev. Sweep claims, or they say that their data shows that 30% of PRs are getting accepted, which is already, I assume it's like very simple tasks. But, if we get to a point where like it's 80 or 90%, I think this is where you feel, okay, it's getting better.
Totally. And you kind of alluded to it, but I'm curious, with this broader AI coding market, it feels like there's lots of startups going after it in different ways. How do you kind of think this evolves? Like, is there just like a company, maybe Replit, that wins the entire space? Is there room for like multiple companies in like this future world? Where do you kind of see this market as a whole going?
I mean, honestly, the default assumption, and this is sort of a bear case on Replit, is that Microsoft wins it all, right? That's like
that's true for like most things in AI, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little depressing, right? But I mean, if you look at the Slack teams, the kind of things, if you look at the past history, Microsoft has this install base, this enterprise base, this really brutal, really awesome sales team, and they have this commercial mindset, and they have a great leader. And so the default thing is Microsoft wins it all. Now, I think the optimistic thing is there's a new crop of companies that specialize in different parts of the stack, of different aspects of the work of the coding workflows. One criticism of Copilot is that it's sort of locked into your editor. It doesn't have context over your other repos, over who's coding with you, over even your Git history, over your Jira tickets. Versus if you take a holistic approach, kind of what we're doing at Replit, where we're trying to provide a cloud development environment with the AI sitting on top of the entire stack. I think you'll be able to build much more ambitious AI products, including these agentic workflows. But I think there are going to be companies that are going to be like the best at generating tests, right? There's like Codium. I think there's 2 Codiums now. One of the Codiums, I mean, that is like they are like, we're just going to like be the best at generating tests, right? And I think those companies will do well. But the question is like, is there going to be a new platform, or is it just the Microsoft sort of GitHub platform? Is GitLab going to be an important part of this equation with their kind of DevOps platform? And so again, the default pessimistic answer is the existing players will just like win it all. But what we're playing for is that we're going to be able to invent and reinvent how software development is made.
What do you think of the pure code generation startups? There's been a bunch of them. We're fortunate to be investors in Poolside. Are those? But you guys obviously have your own models. Like, would you want to integrate with those folks or kind of build your own models? There's kind of a bunch of different ways that it could evolve.
Yeah. So I think what Jason's doing is fascinating. And I've talked to him and ESO about it, and I think it's a bet worth making. Is like, can you build like the best large code model? Again, there's like the default pessimistic sort of point of view, which by the way, I'm not like naturally pessimistic, but I'll try to be rational. The default view is that OpenAI, like GPT-5, is going to be so much better. It's going to do another leapfrog in coding ability that the economics of something like poolside would not make sense. Like, oh, we're going to spend $100 million on training, but we're going to match GPT-4. And by the time we match GPT-4, GPT-5 has come out. And by the way, Code Llama is now matched GPT-4, I think they claim. We'll see.
Yeah, we were excited that news came out right as we were going to have you on.
I'm actually curious. What did you think of the Code Llama release?
I haven't played with it yet. I tend to like try to sit with them and have vibes kind of test. Which
It's all about vibes with the models.
Yeah. I think I coined that, and now it's become a kind of a term of art. But yeah, just like getting the vibes of it. Look, from my Twitter feed, it's mixed. Some people are saying it's obviously very competent at coding, but a lot of people are saying that it still falls short of GPT-4. Mm-hmm. It's GPT-4 level on the benchmarks does not mean GPT-4 level on the vibes, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like the vibes are a little off.
Vibes are a little off.
But some people are saying it's a good base for fine tuning, which I think what you would want out of an open source model. But insofar that like poolside can find a code-specific optimization or direction to take these models in, it could be great for us. How we think about it, we're willing to work with anyone. Really, like the way we see it is we are an applied AI company. We'll do research, we'll do training if we need to.
Yeah,
but the most important thing is how can we deliver value to our customers and users.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the Code Llama I thought was interesting because it seems like the kind of open source code generation models were behind LLMs and the image generation companies, and that seems like the first release where open source is now maybe on par with the proprietary models, although the vibes may be off.
We need to set up a vibes benchmark.
Yeah.
That's going to be our contribution to the space.
There are a bunch of interesting startups doing benchmarking and evals, and I think this is super, super important.
Yeah, we've seen a ton of startups doing that, and it was actually, I think Logan from OpenAI, he said that evaluation would be the biggest trend of this coming year.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or one of those. Hopefully I'm not misquoting him, but
he was definitely into it.
Yeah.
That seems kind of boring though.
Yeah.
If evaluation is the biggest
I think
thing.
he also said multimodal.
That and multimodal. I think,
he was a little more bearish on agents.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, he probably have some inside knowledge if he's bearish on agents. That's not great. But maybe that's great for all the other agent startups and LLMs.
Should we move to quick fire?
Yeah, sounds great. We always like to end our interviews with kind of quick fire round where we ask you some quick questions and get your hot takes. And so maybe to start, we'll just be curious, one thing that's overhyped and one thing that's underhyped in the AI world today.
Chatbots, I think we've arrived at the overhype scenario. I think there are things that should not be chatbot. Underhyped, I think using LLMs as part of everyday systems, meaning it's part of the call chain of software, as part of backend systems and things like that. I haven't seen ways of integrating LLMs in this capacity. I think could be big.
What's been the biggest surprise in building LLM features at Replit?
I mean, how much latency matters. I mean, you sort of kind of intuitively understand that, but like it really changes how you think about the feature. If you have to wait 2-3 seconds for a response, that changes the UX entirely from being able to do it in 300 milliseconds.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of reminds me of the search world where people are like, it's better to be fast and wrong than slow and right. And interestingly, in LLMs and generative AI, it seems like we've kind of taken the slow and right for some workflows.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, obviously, a lot of the stuff you've shipped has worked quite well. I'm wondering, is there an example of something you thought would work and just like fell flat with your users on the AI side?
I mean, there are things that we failed to expose, like inline actions, and I think Cursor is pretty good at this, where you're able to do very contextual actions inside the IDE, but we haven't exposed it very well. Most recently, we started exposing it. Initially, no one was using it, but we started prompting users through all sorts of UI patterns because the cool thing about contextual actions that are better than chat window is because you can derive a lot of information from where the cursor is sitting. And so initially that was sort of a flop, but now we're seeing it growing as a use case.
Which AI startup outside of your space are you most excited about right now?
I mean, it's kind of a boring answer, but like OpenAI is so interesting because of just how ambitious they are. Like, they're doing all sorts of seemingly random things, right? Like they're doing a partnership with Arizona University or something like that. I think that's real, right? They're doing education stuff. They're doing, I think I've heard robotics. They're doing self-driving. They're doing partnerships and investments and things like that. And I think just something I admire about Sam Altman is just how ambitious he is, and he has a sort of ability to be able to spin a whole lot of plates, which is pretty impressive. So I think OpenAI will continue to be a very impressive company, and I think we're just going to continue to be surprised by the kind of things they'll be able to deliver directly and through their partners. Let me give you more of a startup Perplexity. I think there was like a recent hype wave around Perplexity, which is good, but I don't think people understand the kind of engineering that's happening behind the scenes to deliver these results. I mean, there was a ton of competition. They zoomed ahead of everyone there. So I'm very bullish because of how they're building the company, and the technical competency there will continue to deliver value.
I guess if your average startup today has X engineers, 10 years from now, like what percent of that do you think, a Series B company will have?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, again, it depends on adoption. Again, a lot of companies are just lazy. They're not really pushing for, how much they can reconfigure their teams given LLMs. I do think over 5 years you could get what we're getting done now with 10th of the engineers. So it's not maybe a crazy estimate, but I think over 10 years, I coined the term 1,000x developer, 2-3 years ago. But over 10 years, I think there's a 1,000x component to this where you see companies really, really shrink in size.
Do you think we'll still continue to see the number of software engineers grow?
Yeah, but again, we would start to call it something else. I think the product engineer that we call engineer now, I don't know what we would call them. I mean, we don't call TikTok, people like your coworker, a movie star, right?
Yeah. Sorry, Rashad.
We should probably call him a movie star.
Yeah, you don't call Logan Paul like a movie star. We call him a creator. We came up with a new name. It's fundamentally the same thing. They get on front of the screen, they do stuff, right? So I think that software creator of the future, will continue to grow, but we might call it something else, software creator maybe.
I love that. I feel like that's the perfect note to end on. I mean, I guess I want to make sure we give the mic to you. I feel like there's tons of folks that will want to pull on different threads in our conversation. Where's the best place for them to go to learn more about you, about the AI work you're doing at Replit?
So we have a blog, which I think has a lot of technical things, both on AI and different product launches. So blog.replit.com. I have a blog that's kind of, every now and then I'll say something on it, amasad.me, and on Twitter, amasad, and basically everywhere else on the web, amasad. But yeah, the best way to kind of, get a sense of what we're working on is to use the product. And again, you can get a feeling of AI at Replit by just going to replit.com and trying to make something.
I love that. Well, thanks, bud. This has been an awesome conversation.
My pleasure. This is really fun. Yeah,
thank you so much.
No, this was fantastic. That was a fun one.
Super fun. Yeah, he's a cool dude.
like super interesting. I feel like the level of ambition too. I think he said it best. He's like, an entrepreneur should be able to run through a wall. And so, maybe some of these large companies will wait for other folks to make progress in agents, but like we should be at the cutting edge of that.
Yeah, I thought it was super cool what he was saying about the businesses that people are quickly able to build with using LLMs to kind of build these bootstrapped and, I think he called them micro SaaS startups. There was a few people that were making, hundreds of thousands of dollars in ARR in a couple months. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to see for, maybe companies that aren't venture scale. They have, doesn't make sense for them to be venture backed, but they can still be really good businesses and grow and build them quite efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question of what it means for our business. Obviously, like the kind of employee needs to build large startup outcomes are a big reason why venture funds can deploy large amounts of money. And if what he says is true in 10 years, you'll have these 1,000x improvements in what the engineering side. It's just interesting to think about the implications for is there just a lot less businesses that actually require like large venture checks?
Well, I think it could be really good for some companies because what you were able to build, you now can build with 1/10 the cost.
Yeah,
and
this
so
is
it's
the classic.
more about
you're on the early stage team. So
I know,
seed,
optimistic,
great.
yeah.
But also like, you get that first round in and then maybe they don't raise again. On the growth side, it could be more challenging to
That's
write
a
some
good
of our
point.
larger
Yeah,
checks.
I mean, that makes sense. I also thought it was hilarious how he was talking about model training and saying that training on code is really good, but there's also these other data sources that you can train on that can improve performance. And he was like, oh, you can train on legal documents. And then I was think about how bummed the engineers are that wrote all of this code. And then now their code is being improved by training on legal documents. Like, isn't that just, I feel like those engineers are probably so bummed.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we can get all the data from the top engineer out there, but it turns out it's way more additive to find these other sources as well.
The lawyers have their revenge.
Exactly. But it is funny because I feel like he said that right after he was saying, look, anthropologists were like fascinated by these models originally, and it turns out like they're not actually that complex. They're just spitting out data. But like, that is one of the crazy aspects of these coding models, that it's like actually throwing a bunch of non-code related data at them makes them much better.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like, then there's some interesting questions of what is the model actually doing? Like, it's clearly learning in some latent space, it's gathering knowledge that helps it to understand the world based on the data that we fed it. And it is cool that improves code performance.
I also love the bullishness on agents. I feel like a lot of other guests we've had have been like, there's just so much that can go wrong. It's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think you get the sense that someone just super hard charging and inspiring like him might be one of the first to deploy these agents.
Yeah, I thought his take on agents being something that could run in the background when you're not thinking about it, and how we're not there yet, but we could be heading in that direction. I thought that was really interesting, because you could imagine going to sleep and then your AI has fixed a bunch of bugs or done a bunch of things in your repo, so it's ready for you to start coding again in the morning. And I think that's kind of a cool future to imagine.
I also thought it was really interesting, like his whole take on how they built their own models. I mean, obviously, I feel like they were one of the poster children of, I think Mosaic featured them very prominently as like, the non-foundation model companies that were still, throwing massive amounts of data to train their models. One, I thought it was interesting, cost $100K, right? It's like, it's both expensive, but not that expensive, especially.
It's less than you would think. And I think that was part of the Mosaic's post with them was talking about, the economics of it. And
totally, because if it's going to impact your inference run in their case, if they're giving it out in the free tier as well, like, probably pretty good ROI if you end up with the with much lower inference costs. And then I think he kept hammering on latency, which makes total sense. We've heard this idea of like you're either in the flow of creativity or you're not, and the second the model takes a little bit longer, even like to the concept of close to a second. It's like it gets you out of that kind of flow state.
Yeah, it seemed like they had a lot of success around with this kind of model size around 3 billion, which I think a lot of people would think of as small. But to your point, then it's cheaper to run, it's faster for the users. And if you're just doing code generation, then, it can be quite good at a smaller set of tasks.
And I also loved like his take at the end that like, Microsoft might just win this whole thing. Feels like that could, between Microsoft and OpenAI and the partnership, it's like they do cover a pretty broad surface area of stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was a very authentic take and kind of something that, I would imagine every founder thinks about that's building in this space is competing with Microsoft to some extent. But yeah, I'm as you would say, overly optimistic as an early stage investor that there'll be a lot of people to win besides Microsoft.
Totally. And I feel like for anyone with like, a bingo board of stuff that we normally do in these episodes, I was pleased that they could knock off the Taylor Swift reference the second you made it in the middle there.
Yeah. I was worried about weaving that in, but we got it in.
Yeah. I mean, halfway through, there wasn't a natural place to put it. And I'm not sure where you put it was necessarily natural, but
I don't know.
It worked.
Yeah. I probably could have had a better transition, but yeah, that it was I
do love the idea of you being targeted with this Taylor Swift, Kim Kardashian calculus video.
I don't spend much time on social media, but it's mostly kind of parent-esque content, some surfing, and then I guess Kim Kardashian teaching calculus. So, yeah. The last thing I think we should cover is just Code Llama. Announced last week and went viral. As I was talking about in the episode, I think it's really cool because code generation is kind of in the open source has I think been behind LLMs and image generation, and this seems like the first open code generation model that's really high quality. I guess the vibes may be off. Time will tell. But I thought that was cool, and it was interesting to get Amjad's take on it.
No, I mean I think it's to your point. It feels like the in every type of model, the open source options seem to quickly catch up, and it feels like that will just continue to be the case. And it's really cool to see the just how good that model is on at least on the traditional benchmarks. A lot of fun doing another great episode, and for folks that enjoyed this, definitely like, subscribe. We'll continue putting these out. We'll look forward to more Taylor Swift references and AI content here next week.
Thanks so much for joining us.